darkness, my old friend. I've come to talk with you.
We're so today, ladies and gentlemen, with the very likelihood of a second shutdown just around the corner, a lot of people are fearful that we're going to head into a second stock market crash. But today, I want to play devil's advocate, and I'm going to share with you some specific reasons why I don't think there's going to be a market crash, or one that's going to be nearly as substantial as the one that we saw in March. And don't get me wrong, I'm one of those guys that would love to see a crash. I advocate that we get richer in stock market crashes because we can buy assets at relatively suppressed prices against their underlying value. What we see going on in the world is not what is going on in the stock market. Last week we just hit all-time highs. I'm going to try and explain why. So consider hitting that like button and let's jump right into this. Welcome back, passive income investors alike. Now, today, guys, it doesn't matter where you go. You flick it on the news, you're scrolling around in our chat groups, heck, you're scrolling around on YouTube. People are getting pretty fearful right now of what is going on in the global economy. And it leads people to get paranoid about their investments. It leads people to stacking more cash, but this is kind of counterintuitive, and it isn't actually going to be putting you in a better position. I'm going to try and explain to you why. Now, we already got a really good baseline about how the market is responding to this pandemic, especially from March till about May, when we saw this separation in two kinds of companies, okay? We've got our tech stocks, which blew up. They went through the roof because we're all at home. You got things like Zoom. You got things like Apple. You're going to need some computers here, guys. You're going to need some cloud computing software. You're going to need all of that jazz to continue doing your schooling, to generally do your job, is how most of us are working from home. And the fact that tech led us out of this market crash, being the only stocks that drove the entire market up, where we saw a big suppression in the second basket of stocks, obviously being your restaurants, your REITs, your banks, pretty much anything we knew would be directly impacted by this pandemic. I think a lot of those stocks went to some pretty absurd lows, to the point where they were trading at some pretty severe discounts. We're seeing it in the oil market. We're seeing it all over the place. Now, don't get me wrong, some of these stocks, they're not going to recover. And I mean, you're going to want to avoid those like the bloody plague. But when we understand these two separate baskets of stocks, guys, we know if we head into a second lockdown that these tech companies are going to continue to do phenomenally well. We know they're going to be reporting gangbuster earnings again, and the stocks are going to continue high flying. Now, when we're talking about the second basket of stocks that have dragged the whole market down, they all kind of had a big blimp to the upside when we saw Pfizer announce their pandemic cure. But the problem with that cure is we know it's not going to be readily available to everybody. It's really not going to come out for the next few months anyways, so it's kind of like a glimpse into what the future might be holding. But that glimpse was enough to bring up those lower weighted stocks, driving the market yet again into all-time highs. And I'm kind of predicting that they're not going to bottom out to the levels that we saw in March. It all kind of operates on a bit of a macro level. You can't just look at the entire market and say, yeah, we're going to head into another crash, when really, why would we, if tech is just going to continue to be high flying, keep posting amazing revenues, and keep up the lower half of these stocks? And heck, if we get more news of more cures coming out online, even though we'll be on lockdown, if there is just a sign of a light at the end of the tunnel, I still think it's going to keep these more suppressed companies that are trading at huge discounts relatively trading at par. Now, the next big thing that everyone's doing that I don't think is relatively appropriate, and don't get me wrong, I think everyone should have a bit of an emergency fund, a bit of a crash stash, as I'm going to call it. So if the markets do for some reason take a massive dip, you can kind of take advantage of the opportunity. But the problem with the philosophy of stacking cash is you are putting yourself in probably one of the worst investments that I can predictably call pretty much to a T, is the devaluation and what we call inflation in currency, which generally means when they're pumping out stimulus checks, guys, the Federal Reserve, just call me Jay Powell, as we print trillions of dollars off into the economy, it causes the currency price to go down. Very, very simple put ways. For every $1 they print, guys, it devalues the one next to it. And we're seeing this across currencies globally, but especially in the US dollar since this pandemic has hit. And heck, even the Canadian dollar has started rallying a bit because the US dollar has been dropping against it. Now, the ripple effect that comes out of this, guys, is it drives up asset prices. And it doesn't matter what assets you're holding. It could be Bitcoin, it could be gold, it could be real estate, it could be stocks. And just to give you guys a real quick, real world example, this is my RBC account. And just to show you, when you're buying stocks, you're converting your currency into a physical asset, at which you're separated now from the price fluctuations in, for example, the CAD dollar, which we can see over the last month has rallied since I've even been buying Canadian stocks. So that basically means on the change of the dollar, I could have purchased purchased more of the stock today than I did when I was buying it 5 days ago when the dollar was more suppressed. So I'm actually down on this. And even on the flip side, let's say you were to have bought this stock just before the dollar dropped, you could literally convert it back the next day for more cash than you paid for it. And I love that some brokerage accounts do offer this insight in your dollar currency exchange. But you are going to see higher valuations come out of the stock market and all these other assets as people try and flee out of cash. Because you got to remember, when these big funds start pulling massive amount of money out of individual parts of the market, they got to find somewhere to put that money because they definitely don't want to be holding cash. And this is when we see what we call hyperinflation in the market, or parts of the market specifically. And besides, I've said this before, guys, if you put all your money in Canadian dollars in cash over roughly the last 8 to 10 years, you would have seen like a 25% decline in the value of that currency against basically any asset you're buying, including food. So currency is a big no-no from an investment standpoint here, guys. Heck, I would rather you be buying physical precious metals at this point if you have nowhere else to put your cash. And I'm not even a fan of precious metals, but in these kind of circumstances, guys, it will make a difference on your bottom line performance here. Now, while most of you are bobbing your heads up and down, having no idea what to do with yourselves or your money, I'm going to try and simplify this in a way that'll hopefully calm you down. And do not let me digress away from the problems we are experiencing. This sucks. This is terrible. We're not having a good time with this. I'm sitting here. I can't really leave my house, guys. It gets very degrading knowing you can't really travel much. You can't really hang out with your friends. And every time somebody has a wedding or does something stupid, we see an explosion in these cases. So what I can recommend to you guys is the most basic investment strategy that works time and time again. It is the reason it is world renowned for having better performance than traders, fund managers, and everything else in between, is just cost average investing into a diversified portfolio of everything from stocks, real estate, I mean, we could talk precious metals, whatever works for you specifically. What I'm doing right now is the same thing I've always done. I buy stocks month over month and I continue to build my emergency fund. That has not changed, and is probably one of the reasons I've had such incredible performance this year. As I held on to all of my stocks in March, I will hold on to all of them in the next crash, and I'm just going to keep buying time and time again because the assets I'm buying are very well diversified in a means of tech, which is going to continue to perform well. Some of these lower weighted stocks that are still doing great cash flows, that are trading well below discount, you get a little bit of everything, guys, and you'll find your portfolio starts to balance out. And again, I am not advocating that you don't keep your cash. There's nothing wrong with having cash, just don't go nutty with it, because I always believe that the markets try and operate in what we call a Goldilocks zone. It just means things usually aren't as bad as you're going to listen to on some of these stock news YouTubers, and it's also not as great as some people might want to make it out to be. And we're always fluctuating between those two ends of what could be terrible and what could be great, and you're just trying to find that balance. But investing shouldn't be stressful, guys, and if it is, and you're finding yourself having a really hard time dealing with this market, and if you can't just handle that, you need to go to index funds, you need to go to an investment advisor. You shouldn't be doing this yourself if you're an emotionally afflicted person day over day by how the media and the news and the markets are doing these massive swings. Because if there's one thing I'm sure of, it's going to be continued volatility here, guys, and I'm going to come back to the same point. That is something that benefits you as an investor. Still advocate that we are going to wake up probably in a year or so on the other half of this. A lot of these suppressed companies that have been doing well through this are going to start rebounding. Tech, yeah, we might see somewhat of a correction as those things have gone high flying to the roof, but for as long as we are stuck in this pandemic, guys, everyone's just going to keep turning their head to tech because, again, they're doing blowout numbers when we're talking about people ordering stuff on Amazon, people using Facebook and Shopify. But nonetheless, you can always come back here to learn more, and I just wanted to make a bit of a hopeful video in the fear of what I am listening to out in the markets between our chat groups and YouTube and everything else in between. And I'd love to know how you're holding up in all of this, because trust me, life has been very tough on a multitude of levels, because I've had friends getting sick with nothing related to COVID in which you can't really hang out with them. I've been trying to get x-rays done for problems that I personally had, and I haven't been able to get in for 8 months, so I ended up just going to a specialist yesterday that took a lot of stress off my back. But it is frustrating, guys, especially if you have other health problems right now, and the only thing that I can say is just be safe. Put a mask on when you're going out, guys, because none of us are enjoying this whatsoever. And if you follow these rules, there's no reason that your portfolio shouldn't perform well through whatever we are going to experience for the next year, 3 years, 5 years, 10 years. And I could be one of those advocators that, yeah, the market's going to crash, and I'll keep saying it until it happens, and then eventually I'll be proven right. But I don't want to do that, guys. I try and find the glass half full. I'm a little bit more of an over-optimist, and that is something you guys appreciate. Consider subscribing to the channel. But in light of all this, stay cool, stay awesome, and I look forward to catching you guys tomorrow.